This was a terrible event. From my perspective, let me tell you what happened. The diving was done on the 17th of January 1959. Oliver Wells and Phil Davies had dived sump 4, the limit of exploration for non-divers in Swildon's hole at the time. Swildon's 4 is a magnificent piece of river passage. You may well have seen it. They'd reached a terrible piece of passage, Swildon's 5, with very little airspace. It was Johnny Buxton, come to think of it, not Phil Davis, who was with Oliver Wells on that part of the dive. There was very little airspace. They found their way through to a sump 6. They passed through sump 6 and found that on the far side the water was being held up, obstructed by a gravel bank. They reasoned that a couple of divers with decent shovels and an hour's work could knock much of this gravel bank out, lower the water level in Swildon's 5, that's immediately beyond sump 4, which is a really terrible spot. I agree, I went through once before the water was lowered, and make it much easier for the exploration to continue. So the January expedition of 1959 was designed to get 2 or 3 divers from Swildon's 4 through sump 5, Buxton's Har, through sump 6, and digging out the gravel bar obstruction on the far side to lower the water level. In those days we used a big expeditionary style with a large support party called Sherpas, carrying the oxygen cylinders, the various other parts of the diving devices, food and the wherewithal to prepare a hot meal, a hot drink at sump 4, etc., etc. In contrast to the modern diving, where the attack is on sump 12, the divers just put their gear on at sump 1 and carry it through, diving through sumps 2 and the very long sump 3 that is not really traversable safely by non-divers, I understand. Well, we went down on the morning of the 17th of January. It was a cold spell, the ground was frozen, there was fresh snow on top of it, and then after we started into the cave, unbeknownst to us then, with more than a dozen support parties behind us being organised by a deputy at the surface, it began to rain very hard. By the time we got our gear to sump 4 via the long Paradise Regained route and Blue Pencil Passage, a very narrow squeezy section. In fact, Oliver Wells and I had fired the first rapid chemical persuasion charge to widen a bit, a few years before. It was obvious that in the prevailing conditions we could not continue with the dive. We put all the equipment up in a safe bypass of the Oxbow in the middle of the Swildon's 4 streamway passage and retreated through Blue Pencil Passage and Paradise Regained. We were, of course, in all the divers' cases, Oliver and Phil Davies, dressed in full diving dress. I was wearing the standard exposure suit and underwear of the day, RAF exposure suit, and was very, very experienced with Swildon's. I knew where every foothold handle was by that stage. I've forgotten them long since. When we got to the bottom of the 40, we found quite a queue of people waiting their turn to go up. The conditions were Not as bad as they were in the trip that I'm going to talk about in my second episode, but the conditions were very bad. There was terribly cold water coming down, and at the bottom where there was a young man, unknown to us, in very poor condition. He was not wearing a regular exposure suit or any other cover. His name was John Wallington. He'd not been on the trip in any official capacity. He tacked along behind the others at the end, just to see what was going on, I suppose. He and perhaps one or two others. On attempting to climb the 40-foot pot in flood, on the way out, on a lifeline, he knocked off the ladder and hung upside down for 2 or 3 minutes before it was realized, and a brave man climbed up, released him and got him down. He was in very poor shape, but still coherent, but I don't think understanding very much at that time. He was able to eat some chocolate that we gave him, and we decided, as the sort of lead divers, the very experienced people in that cave, to go up and pull him up as quick as we could. So we, in succession, we were very rapidly lifelined up the 40-foot pot to meet the Mendip Rescue Organisation lead rescue party waiting for us at the top. This consisted of the celebrated Bristol caver and surgeon and pathologist Oliver Lloyd, and Struan Robertson, an intern and very experienced caver, a medical intern at Bristol, well known to Oliver. They were close associates, and I believe that Jim Hanwell, a very well-known Mendip caver, my contemporary or near contemporary, was also on the rescue. 3 or 4 of us, 5 of us perhaps, got to the top to join Oliver and Struan and perhaps Jim there, and we set out to pull John Wallington up. An 18-year-old, quite well built, fairly heavy. There was a rescue winch, a pulley system operating, and it went fairly smoothly. Chris Hawkes, another experienced Mendip caver, climbed behind him, making sure that he stayed close to though he was inert by that time, not able to assist himself very much anyway, that he stayed on the line, or close to the line, and got to the top. There were a pair of hands at the top to haul him off. My job was to sit in the force of the floodwater coming behind, about to crash over the waterfall, and divert it from him as we got him over me. I remember lifting him up, trying to give him a square of chocolate. He made some sort of effort to respond. Then I lifted him higher. Struan, I believe it was, lifted him up so that his knees would have been at my shoulder level, and he would have seen the next obstacle, the middle under, in the flooded approach passage to the 40-foot pot, and he would have seen brown, terribly cold water pouring at him. He'd have seen no air because the rest of the passage, any air in the passage, was obstructed by brown floodwater foam. It was a frightening sight. Struan lifted him up, checked him over, and I heard him turn his head upwards to Oliver Lloyd above, and he said, "Oliver, I think he's dead." Oliver Lloyd confirmed that I guess that there was no pulse. Oliver Wells and I and the other man on the hauling team were very dispirited at that, and we we left them with the other rescuers and exited the cave. My first experience with hypothermia in a cave, and in recognizing the onset of hypothermic conditions in people. Of course, since I worked a lot in Canadian caves and up in the Canadian Arctic in the winter, I've seen hypothermic conditions coming on other people and myself a few times and recognized them.